going to talk a little bit about why Flameware, what makes it different, how did I come up with the recipe I came up with. We now sell it here at Clay Planet, a variation of a recipe that I got, that somebody else got, that just gets tweaked as it goes. Welcome, everybody, by the way. How's everyone doing? Everybody, let's just a quick show of hands. Has anybody used actual Flameware clay before? Something that is designed to be open flame on a stovetop? Yeah? Even, nabes, donabes, things from Japan, Korea, China, other places? Awesome. All right. What's that? New Mexico? Excellent. So the clay we designed here, and some other people in the United States have done in other parts of the world, is make it as non-porous as humanly possible. You're trying to come up with a clay that has extremely low expansion. It can handle the open flame, and it's extremely non-porous. A lot of parts of the world, Mexico and other places, they make things called cazuelas, and they're basically designed to handle, they're very, very thick, and they're designed to handle constant kind of low flames to keep things warm. Tends to be they're cooked elsewhere, they're stored in these, and they're kept warm or low flame. They are incredibly porous and incredibly strong, believe it or not, for a lower fired clay. The moral of the story is it's very different. The most common questions I get, and we'll have a time for a little Q&A, and I've got a lot of them printed out here, just frequently asked questions, is what's the difference? So I have people who regularly say, oh, I'd like to buy that Flameware to make a pie plate. And my 90% of the time my question is why? It's not ovenware. Any clay can technically be used for baking, including porcelain. The less sand, the less grog, the less ability to handle thermal shock, the higher percentage it's going to break. So you have to be very, very detail-oriented and make everything very even thickness and get it just right for porcelain, where you can be a little bit more haphazard the more groggy the clay gets. So we sell clays here at Clay Planet: Bravo Buff, Orion Stout, Sculpture Aku, Laguna makes really nice ones called Big White, sold 860, sold 830. Anything that contains a fair amount of grog is what I would recommend for any sort of bakeware. Now that's kind of a fine line, because the groggier it is, the less tactile, you want something that's smooth and nice to feel, the clean. So I like Bravo Buff, or at least the clay we use here. So it's definitely worth trying Flameware. So the whole point of this, I'm going to talk about a lot of things Flameware, but there's certain times when to use Flameware and certain times not. It's like $34 a bag here for a reason. It's expensive, and the raw materials that go into it are also expensive. So yes, ma'am.
To what temperature, what cone?
To what temperature? The Flameware we make here, we always want to fire to cone 10. So I have used Flameware from other companies, other places. It's okay. There are some mid-fire cone 6, cone 7 Flamewares out there that tend to, let's put it this way, it's a very odd saying, but the better it throws, in my opinion, the less likely it is to be able to hold that extremely good flame over time. So this is a great in-between. It's not the easiest of all clays to throw with, but it's definitely not difficult. So it tends to get a little soggy over time. It tends to be a little bit interesting to throw with, and if anyone ever picks them up, you'll see why. I've used clays from other companies, and I remember throwing something that was just beautifully easy to throw, and I thought to myself, there's no way this is gonna work. So, and I've used multiple types. Seattle Pottery Supply makes a good one. There's actually a piece on the far wall over here, I'll show you all at some point, that is from Seattle Pottery Supply. This is a recipe. Most of my clay came from a woman named Robbie Labelle. She got her info from somebody else named Ron Probst. There's a lot of different people who have worked their way through Flameware till they got to a point where it was working very well. So a lot of those people are on the East Coast. Some ingredients you can get, but it's expensive. So I altered the formula. A couple ingredients couldn't be found anymore, and I wanted it to be a little bit easier for some East Coast raw materials. So this is my favorite shape to make. Just a standard, what I call a casserole. Like I said, if you're only planning on baking with it, this is something you can make out of pretty much any sort of stoneware. I like this clay, and I like the Flameware because I like to sear things in it directly on the open stovetop, then add liquid or whatever and put it right into the oven. Today I'm going to make you guys just a little, veggies are always the safe way to go with a group of this many people. So just a simple little veggie dish with a veggie stock and a spicy vinegar on top. At some point, closer to the end, I'll throw it on there. It'll take 5 to 10 minutes at the most. It'll let you all see it completely boiling, bubbling. This thing could come to a boil. You can put the lid on and put it on the table, and 5 minutes later take the lid off. It will still be boiling. So it is really designed to hold heat extremely well. We are going to talk about this style of handle, which are my favorite for any sort of functional dish. You guys can see if I'm lifting this piece upward, the way the handle is designed, you would have to pull the handle this way to kind of weaken it, and it's not the way the handle is designed to be lifted. So I also make a lot of frying pans. At some point, I'm going to invite everyone to come up and pick these up. They're heavy, and they're heavy for a reason. Thin pieces tend to be more prone to cracking. There's just not enough ceramic mass to help with a thermal shock. So you don't want them so heavy that you fill this with something and you can't flip a pancake, which this is bordering on. But you also don't want them so thin. I've made them a little on the thinner side before to test, and those are the ones that no longer exist. So when you try this out on your own, I would definitely recommend leaving it thick. And actually, I think that's the hardest part. We're also trained to try to throw as tall and thin and even as thin as possible, so leaving them thick is difficult. So if you guys come to pick these things up, you'll see they're a little bit on the beefy side.
Do you throw the handle also?
I do, and I actually have a couple under plastic here, so I purposely 90-minute demonstrations for Flameware are difficult. So I'm going to throw, it's kind of be like a cooking show. I'm going to throw you a bunch of stuff and say, oh, surprise, surprise, what's sitting here in the oven are the pieces I threw on Thursday that I tried to just get to the nice. So I'll show you all how to trim, how to add a knob for the lid that's going to go with this guy. There are some specific rules about the feet. You'll find there's never any foot rings or anything else. And I recommend an all bakeware, always just slightly rounded smooth. So this piece actually has a very, very slow, subtle curve before it flattens out. That's for the open flame. It's also, if you put it in your oven on a rack, a little foot ring is something that could tilt or drip a little bit easier. So the simpler the piece, the better.
So what temperature have you put in the oven for how long?
This could go for all eternity. So I'll give you all just a very quick how we test these pieces. This specific piece was made, fired up to cone 10. When it came out of the kiln, we filled it with water and we put it in the freezer. So for 3 days, a solid block of ice formed. We took it out and put it on that exact burner, and we melted the ice until it completely boiled. We allowed it to keep firing until all the water boiled away and evaporated, and we let it go for 5 more minutes. So you could almost see red, meaning this piece was getting hot enough. We took it with tongs and we dunked it in water. We refilled it with water, we did it again. So if it'll go through that process once, I certainly don't think any of your cooking at home is going to be to that extreme baked Alaska, frozen, flambéed, whatever it is. But the goal is to put it through such tests that no one would ever get to that point. You'll break it by dropping it or bumping it into something before it'll break from a flame. So these pieces have been put through quite a few tests. These are ones I just brought from home. I use them regularly. So
When you put it on the flame, you do a low fire and then heat it up gently, or you just
So
blast it?
for ceramic purposes, kind of like cast iron, you could. It takes a little bit longer for it to actually hold the heat. So the question of getting here was, do you start it on a low flame, then slowly lift it up? You can. There's no reason to for like the safety of the piece. You'll see, I'm gonna keep talking about this, somehow it's gonna break on this time, but you'll see it'll handle just about anything. This is gonna be bigger than any flame you'll ever have in your kitchen or home. It does work on electric burn top stove tops as well. I like the gas flame because I think it's a little more even heating. You can kind of adjust it based on where the flame's coming from. I'm just gonna hit, oh, I'm sorry, Anita, what's up?
Just a quick question. I quickly looked at your handout and I saw that there were recipes for glazes, but from here it doesn't look like this is glazed inside or outside.
That's correct. I don't glaze my Flameware. 99% of the time, Flameware can handle anything. Glazes usually can't. Now there are a couple of glazes that we formulated here to fit a couple of these Flameware bodies, and they do work well. There are some recipes out there. You can't just take this home and throw rutile on it and hope for the best. What's gonna happen is within a few weeks, it's gonna start to craze and crackle. Those little micro cracks are more prone to harboring bacteria. They're not gonna clean out as well. And I've actually heard of people who 6 months from now they're firing it and ping, 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 little pieces of glaze actually go flying off. Especially if you fire these in reduction. The clay itself has no problem, but carbon can get trapped kind of with the glaze that's firing and create a little barrier between the two. For ease of use, I treat mine like cast iron. I'll cook with them. When I clean them, I'll heat them up really well. I'll put some salt, I'll scrub them. I usually don't put them in the dishwasher. I don't put them with soap. I heat them up to burn off any of the impurities. And over time, they will become extremely non-stick, just like cast iron can. So there's actually something else I'll send to you, all of those who signed up. It's called the 11 Rules of Cast Iron. I send that out as the 11 Rules of Flameware. Now, 3 of those rules are about not letting it rust. We don't have to worry about those. My favorite reason for these is you can make anything you want. I have a little single 1-egg pan at home that's the most adorable thing you've ever seen that's this big around. It's great. I've made larger tangias and tagines, there's no limit. If you can make it, sometimes you go home and you're like, man, I'm always making this specific dish. I wish I had something. You can just go make yourself one. I'm gonna spend just a couple minutes hitting a few things in here that I don't want to skip, but once again, anyone who wants this will get it. Basically what's in here is everybody else's Flameware kind of history. Who started it, what recipe they're using, why they changed, this kind of all of this. Mine would be the next section of this is where I started by reading all these things. It's so funny is it's somewhat of a popular thing. There's really like 3 or 4 people. I mean, I know there's more now, but that like we're kind of the behind the history of Flameware. So there's a guy, Ron Probst, he kind of started it all. He wanted specifically the same thing. He was selling cookware to friends and they'd call him back a month later and say, hey, it broke. So he started messing with different formulas. It's got the same things in it as standard clay. The big 3 things that are additions you're always going to see in almost every formula is spodumene, which doesn't go into most clay bodies. It usually goes into glazes. Pedalite and something called pyrophyllite, also known as Pyrex or Pyrax. It's literally what they use in their Pyrex glass cookware and bakeware. It has a really amazing ability to withstand thermal shock. Although, if you look at it under a microscope, it's tiny, tiny little needles. So many, many years of doing ceramics, my hands tend to be a little bit bulletproof to these things, but I have taught these workshops before and people are like, my hands hurt, and you look really close and there's like micro little, almost looks like little pieces of sand or grog. It's usually about 1 out of 25, and we have to take a piece of tape and put it on the hand to like pull out these little tiny things. So fair warning, when you go to throw this for the first time, start out small. I always recommend when using a new clay, start small, work your way up. Make yourself a shot glass for those super flaming hot shots you want, whatever it is, work your way up from there. So he talks about all sorts of things in here. Once again, you'll see it. And he goes into talking about why he got rid of one of the recipes and moved on to another. And basically there's his original recipes here. There's glazes that match his original recipes. And basically, it's a lot of important information. Where I started off really starting to do my test is a woman named Robbie Labelle. She's still around today. She makes Flameware. She makes her clay specifically to be ram pressed so it can be pushed extremely firm, compress all the particles with very little water to be added. Some of the shapes you see here have to be a certain way, just like when you buy plates at like a Target. Those are not ever hand thrown. They're going to be thinner. They're going to be laid down to an edge differently than if we had to throw our plates. The specific recipe I'm going to talk a little bit about today, which is the basis of some of these things, is here on this page. Once again, you'll get this. But there's a couple important things. This recipe called for something called G200 Feldspar, which no longer exists, which is why we had to sub it out to try something else. It also called for a specific size grog that is not available on the West Coast, only the East Coast. And it calls for a couple other things that are really East Coast clay bodies. There's a fire clay called Missouri Hawthorne Bond. It's a little pricier, harder to get from the East Coast. What you'll find everyone has kind of worked their way through. They said as long as you've got the big 3, which is usually pedalite, pyrophyllite, and spodumene, the ball clay, the fire clay, the grog size, some of these things can be intertwined and you should still be okay. It might affect the plasticity of how well it throws. It might affect the color of how it fires. But those are kind of the big things. So I have. So I've done probably 30 or 40 different recipes at this point, and the one I've stuck with is a substitute or variation of one of the ones that's in this pamphlet. Once again, we now make this at Clay Planet. It's a completely different recipe. So they wanted something a little bit easier to bring in clays on the West Coast, a little bit easier to make without it being super expensive per bag, a little easier to put through a giant machine that makes 2,000 pounds of clay at a time. All those things have to be thought of when they do it. It throws better than mine. So they went for more usability, but I've done some crazy tests on it and it works extremely well. So if you ever were to pick up Flameware from us at Clay Planet, if everyone doesn't know, I also work here at Clay Planet. So occasionally I'll throw out some things just because, not I like it better or worse than others, but I'm around it the most. So I'm going to go a couple of frequently asked questions, then I'm going to jump on the wheel. Because if not, I'll talk this whole thing and we'll never get to anything. So can I use my current clay body for Flameware? 99.9% of the time, the answer is no. Some people have used terracotta in the past, even our cinnamon clay. I've known people to buy terracotta planters and bake bread and stuff with it. There's some heat it can handle, but it cannot handle the open flame, the size of it that we're going to use. What glaze can be used, once again, if you use something with a high amount of spodumene or iron, it usually will work for some amount of time, but we do make 2 specific glaze formulas here that are specific to fit this clay body. Glaze is really only there for 2 reasons. One, it's pretty. And 2, it makes it a little bit easier to clean to have that kind of a glossy non-stick surface versus trying to scrub the bottom of your Flameware pot. I'd recommend skip the glaze to begin with, work your way up to that and try it out. Why do you use it? I use it for its durability. I use it because I can make the pieces to anything I want. I have cookie sheets at home I've made pizza stones. Anything you can think of, like I always make this sort of thing. I wish there was a pot that this size. You can make whatever you'd like. I like to make my casseroles wider and shallow because I'm usually searing in them. The more space you have, the more you can sear before it goes in the oven. Why does it work? It works because of the raw materials inside of it. Once again, spodumene, petalite, pyrophyllite, those are kind of the big 3 that help it for its flame retention and its thermal shock abilities. Can you use it in the microwave? Yes. High iron clays, I usually recommend people testing in a couple second increments. We sell some clays here that contain manganese, contain higher amounts of iron, and I have been told by others they can zap out your microwave. Usually the clay body is okay. It tends to be more like a heavy iron saturate, tomato red, berry rust. Some of those glazes can be problematic because there's a lot of metal in them, and metal doesn't work in microwave. So I'm going to say the answer is yes. Question mark. Up to you to decide. How do I clean it? Is it dishwasher safe? Technically, it's dishwasher safe. It's going to be the most non-porous clay you've ever used. It's going to be less than 1% in terms of how much water will absorb in. You do not want a clay that's going to fill with water and then you heat it up to a very high temperature. Your piece is not going to survive well. I recommend not using it in the dishwasher though, just for soap and scouring things. Once again, kind of like cast iron, I wouldn't make fish in it and then give it a quick clean and maybe do brownies next. I might put a little more effort into it than that. You don't have to heat the pot in the oven. You don't have to preheat. You could take this you can marinate chicken in it overnight and just throw it in the stove. There's a lot of good things about it. It's tend to be really for ease of use. Can I hand build with it? This is the question I get the most. The answer is yes, if you are skilled at hand building. I've been doing this a very long time. I am not skilled at hand building. I am a poor hand builder. I'm also a little ADD, and I like to just get things done quickly, and after many years on the wheel, that tends to be the best for me. Another employee here, Shawn, makes beautiful, we sell the GR pottery forms here, any sort of plate, push plate style. The reason people have had issues in the past with hand building is it's a little bit more difficult, in my opinion, to get an exact even thickness. If you're going to use a form, you're going to push into it. A very heavy flame will find any imperfections in your piece. And if it's a 1/4 of an inch thick or 1/2 inch thick everywhere and very thin around the edges, it's going to break there. So you definitely can if you take the time and make it right and make it a little bit thicker. I will leave that up to you. I've seen beautiful pieces that were hand built. I don't have the skills to do so, so I don't. How do you trim? How is it different than normal pottery? I'm going to demonstrate about that. We talked about a little bit, rounded bottoms, no foot rings, keeping it thick, all that sort of stuff. Does anybody have any questions based on just what we've talked about so far? Anita. No, it is different. So micaceous clay is a type of clay dug out of the ground, and it's actually why a lot of clays in other parts of the world can be used for flames where ours cannot. In New Mexico and other parts of the world, they can dig a clay right out of the ground that contains mica, or they're adding micaceous clay to it, and it can help with thermal shock. It's not a grog. It's a material that's just known for its flame-proof properties. Same idea, tends to be something low fire. Imagine like a terracotta or a low fire red clay that contains iron. They're adding the micaceous clay to, or it's there naturally. It can handle the flame, it can handle the heat. It probably wouldn't be able to handle the torture that we're going to put it through here. So there are some benefits of this, and there are some negatives. We have to mass produce this. I can't just go to the yard and dig it out and make something. Certain parts of the world they can, based on just what's in their soil, what's in their clay. So I'm going to wedge up a piece of clay. I'm going to meet at the wheel. I'm going to start with about 6 pounds of clay to make something around this size. This is a 3-pound piece if you were making it normally a bowl or whatever else. I'm going to start with about 6 because I am going to trim a decent amount off the bottom, and I want to leave it thick. We're going to go over my very odd 4-step process of how to do these little lid flanges to get things to fit nice and tightly. So I'm actually going to throw the pieces you see here, and then through magic, I'm going to grab these ones and I'm going to trim them and attach them. They were a little dry this morning. One of them may have had a crack in it, but it's for demonstration purposes. It also tends to mend well, this clay body, for some reason. It tends to have a nice something about it that you can come in and smooth it, get rid of these things, and then let it dry slowly, and it'll kind of fix itself, which is nice. So I'm gonna meet everyone here at the wheel. I'm gonna grab some clay. We're all gonna pretend I weighed it out perfectly, and I spent a lot of time wedging it. Both of those things are probably important. I'm just gonna grab a big chunk and head that way. I'm gonna do quite a bit of compressing on this, so I think it'll be all right. I'm kind of a do as I say, not as I do guy. And if I were sitting at home making this, I would definitely have wedged it and got it prepared. I'm occasionally going to move this bucket in and out of the way. It's the smallest one I could find so I can see what I'm doing. I don't usually throw with a water bucket off out of the way onto the ground, just to warn you. So, ooh la la. We're going to go reverso today just to give myself a challenge. So, I love throwing on bats when throwing bigger pieces. Especially during a demo, there would be no way to take a big casserole off and then move to the next phase. So in general, I actually throw on bats. I like the way it feels unless I'm throwing something smaller. So some people despise them. I don't like the wobble, wobble, wobble. There's some ways you can tweak that by putting some firmer clay in where the bat pins are, putting a bat gripper or something underneath. I'm gonna show you all a way, at least in my opinion, that shouldn't bring in the wobbles of the bat. So there's gonna be very little, a lot of pressure from one side. I'm gonna really cone it up and cone it down to try to get the piece centered without having to put a lot of uneven pressure. That uneven pressure is what makes this thing go rat-a-tat-tat-tat as you're throwing. So we're gonna just guesstimate that that's about 6 pounds. And we're gonna do a little quick wedge here. So this is fresh clay. Right out of the bag. It is pugged, it is de-aired, it should be ready to go, but something a lot of people don't realize, no matter where you get your clay, it pugs out of a giant machine and it pugs in a spiral. If you've ever tried this, you could open up a bag of clay, take a thin slice, and if you bend it, occasionally you will see that spiral. This is why I recommend always wedging your clay no matter what. Now, if you cut a small square out and you pack it together and you're gonna throw it or center it or put a lot of compression into it, it should be okay. But I've had people many, many years talk about why did it crack here, why did it crack there. This is realigning the particles. If you cut it at an angle, cut it down the side of the bag and use it, it would actually probably be okay. So if you're gonna throw it, you're probably gonna compress it enough, it'll be fine, but I always give everything at least a quick wedge. So maybe 6 pounds. I'm gonna spend a lot of time making sure it's stuck down. I'm gonna cone it up, cone it down, and then we'll go from there. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about this little sponge. When I was in Japan recently, vacuum sealed in a little thing in the showers was this, for scrubbing your body like a little loofah. I didn't use this one, but I grabbed 3 or 4 before I left. There used to be a sponge called the sugar loaf back in the day you could get for throwing pottery. It absorbs water amazingly well. It doesn't leave texture, so there's some other potters out there that use couch fibers and that. A sponge is a sponge, it doesn't really matter, but I really love this thing. So like I said, I have 2. You'll see me just reach for whatever and it's fine, but you know, these little things that we work with are great until we can't find them. So be flexible, but if you got some specialty tools, feel free to pop them out for this one. All right, so I'm gonna start, and I'm gonna go through this as if no one's ever thrown pottery before, so you might be a little bored with some of the techniques, but step 1, your wheel should always be touching your stool. You should be as close forward as humanly possible. If I'm trying to wedge 6 pounds of clays like this, I just have no muscles. I mean, I have no muscles anyways, but I have no like weight behind it. Your back should be doing a lot of the work here. So I'm gonna start with the bottom part of both hands, and I'm gonna really squeeze down to make sure this is stuck. And then I'm gonna work my way up. Make sure it's stuck, I say. Sure, yeah. So I tend to throw fairly aggressively, and I tend to throw pretty wet. I find myself saying to myself, use less water, but I can't. Too many years, I use a lot. I get away with it for the most part because I also throw fairly quick. I'm a big grip it and rip it, pull it up type of guy. I've pulled bats off plenty of times, so just so you know, there's gonna be some techniques that I do that might not work well for you. So if you're fine with throwing the way you throw, stick with it. So I'm gonna cone up and down once or twice. Once again, trying to make sure everything's stuck, and what I'm doing is just squeezing and working my way up. Start down to the bottom again. I'm gonna squeeze and work my way up till, I mean, this thing's pretty centered, right? I haven't had to go in. How I taught ceramics for many years is you push with your left hand as hard as you can, then you come in with the right hand, push down. When you're throwing on a bat, if it's not 100% brand new, you're gonna run into some issues. So that's why I like this technique. You cone up, you cone down. I use a decent amount of water, but I also love the reclaimed slip and putting it back on the pot. It'll help it be slippy without new water absorbing in. This tends to just sit on the surface. So this is a weird trick. I'm gonna bend this at an angle. Teenagers. I'm gonna bend it forward at an angle, then push it back down. It'll actually help it travel right back into itself. If I just push down from above, it doesn't work as well. So I'm gonna lean forward. I'm gonna start my hand on the top, my right hand slightly underneath, and my arms are really locked in. Little T-Rex arms that can't go anywhere. And then the key here is just to let go slowly. So pretty close already, a little bit of a wobble. That's something that we can now take care of by just working our way. This is what I consider the normal technique. Left hand forward, right hand down. The right hand is doing quite a bit more work here, and just a reminder, you can't keep your left hand pushing it so firm or it'll never spread out. You gotta let your right hand take over here. Whether you're left-handed or right-handed, I'm gonna stick the same thing here because I'm using both hands, one time one way, one time the other, but I'm using them equally. So I'm gonna use my right hand, and I use it curved around the edge a lot. I want this to be a little taper. It'll help it slide out more. So we'll lightly push down, and then I'm gonna slowly let go. Once again, the goal here is to try to get a big centered mound of clay. This is where you need to start thinking about what kind of pot do I wanna make, and how do I throw? I use my right hand very aggressively on a couple of pulls, so even if I start out very wide, it's gonna end up being a little bit more narrow because I pull so firmly with my right hand. I like these usually kind of narrow and rounded casserole style. I might make this one a little bit more vertical because I have a lot of these already. So it really depends. None of the ones I own right now, because I've sold quite a few and given away quite a few, I don't have a giant one. We know if you had a bunch of people over for chilly night or something. So I'm just going to keep centering this down, and this is not the only way to do this, but this is the way I like to do it. It's going to start out as a wide, shallow plate shape. And I don't know if you're noticing, I'm continually pulling this slip off my hands and adding it back to the piece so my hands will slip without having to add more water. So I'm going to do one last push. Come in with my left hand and give it one little squeeze so it's centered. And this will end up being the base of my piece. It'll probably get a little bit more narrow, once again, like I said, because I do things differently. This is a little different for some people because usually do one way or the other. They open it up like a bowl and lift it out, or they open it up like a plate. I'm gonna do both. I'm actually gonna take my finger and open a little hole here in the center. Step one, guess one, how thick are we gonna leave it? This is the first place people will start to go astray, because if you go too thin here now, obviously it can be fixed, but it's a little difficult. So I'm gonna stab that down to the bottom and I'll lift it up. And I don't know how well everyone can see, but it's about a ½ inch. I probably have a space to go down just a little, but once again, I'm gonna trim this some. If I could throw it to where I barely have to trim and can just do the edge, that's the best case scenario because of laziness. But I prefer that. So here's step one where things will get a little weird. I tend to open away from me. It makes 0 sense and doesn't work for most people, but I've always done it and I've gotten it to work for me at this point. So basically I'm gonna put my hand on this side. Wherever you're opening to, you should always have another hand bracing the outside edge. So I'm gonna slowly start to work out a little bit at a time, trying to keep my hand on my thumb on the inside flat. I don't wanna open this thing up and realize I have this giant dome this way or this giant gouge. There's nothing worse than getting the depth perfect and then gouging it out. So a little bit of water just so my hand continues to slide. And you'll notice when I'm done, this thing's gonna be kind of volcano shaped. And that's purposeful. I always want this thing tapered in, and everyone's probably tried to make a cylinder before and it's turned into a bowl. It wants to open up. So I'm gonna fight that by forcing it to stay in. And I'm gonna compress this thing now back down to kind of where I want it. I will open it up some. Now, because of the way I pulled it open, it's gonna be thinner at the top and thicker at the bottom, so I'm gonna go ahead and compress it back down also, just so everything starts out as a nice even thickness. So basically we're gonna add a very short, squatty kind of dog bowl shape. So I'm gonna check the bottom. I'm just gonna use my sponge at first just to smooth out the very inside. And because of the shape I'm making, I am gonna want a very small rounded edge where the wall meets the floor. You don't want it completely straight up for multiple reasons. One, cleaning, you make spaghetti or something, it's hard to get into those little edges. A slightly rounded shape will be stronger, it'll be more flame proof, and it'll be easier to clean up. So even if you make it squared off at the very end, it'd be worth taking a rib or something in there to round off that inside edge. So I'm gonna compress down, as weird as it sounds, one more time. Why push down if you're gonna pull it up? Because I want everything as even as possible to start with. I have found people who will spend all this time, they'll get it almost perfect and they'll stop and the thing will have a little wobble like this. I'm like, yeah, close enough, and they'll go. Where they just spent 3 or 4 more seconds. You're gonna give yourself a better chance for success if you spend a little more time. The more centered to even this is, the next step will be even easier. So, I'm gonna smooth out this edge, and what I'm gonna do is just go to the bottom and I'll lift and pull, and once again, this is gonna be like 90% my right hand. When I do demos for intro class and other ones, I purposely do this demo, so I might as well do it for you all here. It's not a showing off thing, it's just to prove your right hand makes cylinders, lifts up the walls, your left hand pushes them out and makes shapes. So only with my outside hand, I'm gonna grab and slowly work my way up and up and up. And you'll notice things are gonna get a little bit taller, a little bit thinner, and it's gonna keep that kind of volcanic faced in shape. I don't actually do that when I throw. But if you turn this into a wide, shallow piece too quickly, you're gonna have a very hard time coming back with it. Always easier to go vertical and open it up some, then start open wide and bringing it back in. So same thing, I'm gonna compress. So we talked about the piece, leaving it a thicker piece to begin with, but we also want the very top of this to be almost twice as thick as the rest of it. The goal is for us to have the wall of the piece, the base of the piece, and the wall needs to be thicker at the top because I'm gonna split it to make the flange where the lid's gonna sit. If it's a little bit thin at the top already, you split that in half, you push the clay down, everything's gonna be even thickness except the very top. So it is another thing, at least for me, difficult to leave the top thicker than the rest of the body. And there's a fine line of how thick can I leave the top when it's thinner underneath. So I'm gonna start back down to the bottom, and this one I'm just gonna smooth out, one, because I just did that odd pull with nothing but my outside hand. So hopefully everyone can see my arms are locked in, nothing, I'm not doing a bunch of movements, it's literally just this, that's all that's happening. I'm not a big sports, I love sports, I'm not great at most of them, but just like anything else, the fewer moving parts, the better. Shooting free throws, swinging a golf club, I think that's probably a thing a golf coach would say. Don't do all these weird things. Same thing, golf and throwing Flameware. They're pretty much the same thing. So, at some point, once I open this up a little bit and it's easier for me to get my hand down inside, I'm gonna spend a lot of time with my metal rib compressing the floor. One, the more you compress it, the more strength it is. You align the particles, it'll be stronger. And two, it'll start to burnish the bottom. The smoother we can get this bottom now, the more non-stick and smoother it'll become. There is some sand and grog in this clay body, so it'll never be super, super smooth. Matt, the owner here, has made pieces, and he started out with sanding pads, like a 60 mesh to a 120 to a 200 to a 400 to a 600. It's like a piece of marble now. He has more patience than I do.
Making a terra sigillata out of this kind of clay.
That's a great question. So the question is, could you make a terra sigillata or something out of this clay? So technically the answer is yes. You got to be a little bit more careful because you're putting a layer of something on the outside of it. It should be fine, but if anything were to crackle off or with the flame run into issues, it might be that. So I have mixed this before, taken this, turned it into a slip, and mix it with like a light colorant or something to get a slightly different color just for outer edges or putting it on the knob. But you definitely could, what I tend to do is use a metal rib and just burnish the hell out of it while it's on the wheel, and then when it's leather hard and bone dry, I'll burnish it even more. So that way it'll be less work later on when it comes to actually smoothing it out with some sort of tool. All right, so that was 2 pulls vertical. This one's gonna start to let my left hand open up towards the top a little bit. And once again, when I get towards the top, I'm gonna ease up some. I do not wanna thin out the top any more than it is. So the way I throw almost any bowl is 2 pulls get the weight of the piece up. The third one, your left hand starts to push out. So basically it'll go vertical, vertical, then a V shape, And now I'm going to spend some time in this very bottom edge, rounding it out just a little bit. So, and I tend to do just about everything with my hands and a sponge, and then I will come in on the final pass with a metal rib just for shaping. So I'm going to really lock my arms in, really have my hand on the inside. I'm going to start to lightly push out. So way down here at the bottom, there's still a lot of clay. So I'm going to grab it first. I'm going to lift that clay up, and now I'm going to slowly start to push out. Now you got to be careful. You can stretch with your left hand. You can pull with your right hand, but if you do both at the same time, you're double thinning out the wall. So if you're just shaping, it's going to get a little thinner just because the piece is getting wider. You know, if you start out with a little cylinder like this and you push it out this wide, it has to get thinner. Well, if I'm pulling and lifting the clay at the same time, it's thinning it by lifting it vertical, and it's thinning it by pushing it out. So be careful with this final step. That was my last kind of pull to get some height, and now I'm just going to use a rib to smooth it out and round it some. The cool thing here is this is where you decide what shape you're looking for. Once again, I'm just going for a somewhat of a 45-degree angle, a rounded shape that I could cook in. I've had people make them just like this. They wanted something taller. They're mainly doing soups and things. They want to boil corn in it, whatever it is. So last pass here. I'm going to grab my favorite of all tools in the history of all time, the $1.99 metal rib. I don't think, I've actually taught workshops where I forgot or didn't have one, and I was stressed because I love this tool. In this exact one, there's multiples. It has to have this little edge where it goes flat then rounded, because I use this edge a lot. Down to the bottom, putting in texture, I use it for quite a bit. This clay does an odd thing where it starts to dry out in rare spots. So I found over the years of using Flameware clays, as you're pulling, everything seems nice and wet, and then you hit a dry spot, and every time it comes around. So I do constantly use that slip or add a little bit of water. If it were going to run into any issues, it'd be now. Just because I've used a decent amount of water, I'm throwing slower than I normally would, just because I'm kind of talking through the process. So all I'm using is this rib with my outside hand. So it's got a tiny bit of a wobble, not much. It's good and bad thing about these, at least for me, when it's a cylinder, I fix the wobble by pushing in from the outside. You fix it. With a bowl, I tend to fix the wobble by pushing from the inside out into a shape, which is good, it'll fix it, but if you gotta push too much, the thing opens up more and more and more. So I'm gonna do one more pass. I'm gonna once again add a tiny bit of water, and when I get to this point, instead of adding water to the whole thing, I tend to just take my sponge and try to like softly dampen the inside. So final pass, I'm gonna just open the top up a little bit more, and I'm gonna open the bottom a little bit more as well. So it's important to get the rim as even as possible, at least with my technique, because I need to split this rim. I need to put a flange in here. And if the rim is doing this, it's hard to get a needle tool or a tool to slice it. This is always the scary part of the demo, because once again, I like the way I do this technique. It's a 3 or 4 step technique. It's a little bit silly, but it puts the least amount of pressure directly on the rim of like a wet piece. You could set this aside, let it dry up some. I've got a torch, I could torch a little bit, which is what I will do. But basically, just so you'll know what's coming, I'm gonna take the needle tool, and if you can imagine this rim in thirds. So the first left third, then the middle, then the next. I'm actually gonna take this needle tool and hold it on here to slice a little slice, a third of the way into the rim. So everyone get some faces like, wow. You'll see it hopefully when I do it, but basically you don't need a lot of clay on the inside. If I slice this right down the middle and open it up like this, you're gonna end up with this giant flange on the inside you don't need. I just need a tiny bit of clay to lay down, so when I lay my lid in there later, it's something for it to sit on. I've actually made these without that at all, and for hand building purposes, I've just added little nubs later. I made a grill out of one of these, where I threw a really big one, I put in 3 nubs in 3 parts, and I put charcoal inside, and I put a little rack on top, and you make like a little mini camping grill. I'm telling you, it's never ending. I've made coffee pots you can put on the stove while you're camping. It's just very, very cool the things you can make. So I saw somebody who made, it was for one reason only, it was for sweet potatoes when he was camping. And it could fit 3 sweet potatoes on the inside. It was mainly covered with a little hole they'd slide in, you could slide them out, and that was it. It was his sweet potato little ceramic camper to throw on the fire. So I'm going to smooth out this edge just slightly. And what I'm going to do is grab this torch. As much as I'd love the oohs and ahs of collapsing this whole piece during the demo, I think it'll be a little safer. I love a torch. Something fake masculine and manly about it, probably, but I also am just, once again, I'm a little ADD and a little lazy. So if I can get this going at a slowish speed, and I'm only going to do this for about 30 seconds. Basically, the slower you can have the wheel speed, the better. The one place you try to not heat it much is the very, very floor where it's attached to the bag. Dries too quickly there, it's still attached to the bag. Even a clay that's designed to not crack from thermal shock will crack. This still has a lot of moisture in it. I'm not trying to get to like bisque temperature, but you know, you heat it hot enough, you'll cause some issues. I'm trying to heat up just the top inch or two, so the next step will be a little easier. How's everyone doing? Any questions? Anybody have anything going on so far as I just sit and flame this? What's that? It is, very slowly. I could probably go a little slower, but this is okay. If it goes too fast, you don't stay in one area long enough. So I just have this going. I'm gonna let it go for, like I said, 30 seconds just to stiffen up some, because even my technique is designed to not put a lot of weight down on the rim. It's still gonna put some. So up here on the rim as well, and just on the inside. You will in a moment. So if you can imagine, let's just pretend this rim is an inch thick. So if I go a third of an inch, a third of an inch, a third of an inch, instead of taking a needle tool and slicing it dead center in the middle, I'm going to cheat towards the inside edge. And the reason for that is I'm cutting straight down and I'm going to lay it down where I cut it, basically. So there are plenty of people who are better at this than I am, and they'll just take a wooden rib and push it down and that's it. But this clay, like I said, is a little problematic. It's a little wet. When you throw it, it tends to absorb a little bit of water. So this just tends to be the safest way to go. So let's hope that's enough. Does anyone have the time out of curiosity? It could be 4 and I wouldn't have any idea right now. 11:29, okay. So I'm gonna use a needle tool. And like I said, if you can imagine me going dead center right in the middle of this thicker rim, instead of going dead center in the middle, I'm gonna cheat inward. And all I'm gonna do is make a little line, I'd say about 1/8 of an inch deep. So this is one of those things where you gotta have somewhat steady hands. I've had people spin the wheel this slow and try to do it. If you get your wheel going a little bit quicker, within reason, it'll help do some of the work for you, just like when you're trimming or doing anything else. So I'm gonna go at like a medium plush speed. I'm gonna come in, because when you dry these out, no matter what, you're drying them a little unevenly. So even if your piece was perfect beforehand, sometimes you'll find it's got a little wobble now. So a deep breath, and I'm not gonna talk for a second. I'm just gonna come in. Here's a very important rule about this. Sometimes your rim is curved. Sometimes it's curved this way. If I go in and slice it and it's curved at a weird angle, I'll just slice right through it. So mine is actually curving in a little bit this way, which means I'm gonna have to slice it at a little bit of an angle. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm gonna rest my hand on my knee. I'm gonna come in always on the right side, and I'm gonna use my finger as a guide. I'm just gonna very slowly, at an angle, okay. Shawn Felts has patented 4-step process. Step 1. It's a little nerve-wracking. Step 2, we moved a slightly larger tool, and we're gonna open that up. We're basically gonna turn it into a V shape. I'm gonna use the angled side of the wooden stick tool, which, believe it or not, yes, that is its actual name. Very creative. And I'm gonna put it in here, I'm gonna push forward a little bit, so I'm actually, instead of opening them both up, I'm actually gonna lay this side down a little. Then I'll come in with my fingers, then I'll come in with a rib. Once again, it's a little bit annoying of a process. It works well for me. If you try it and you hate it, I won't be mad at you. I'm gonna add a tiny bit of water inside of this little groove I just made, just to make my tool slide a little bit more easily. And round 2, I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna use the edge of this tool. And just open it up slightly. Now I've had people make pots where they just open it up into a big V, they smooth out both edges of that, and then they make the bowl shape fit inside of the V. It's awesome if you can do that. It is very difficult to make it fit perfectly inside of there, just because when you throw these rounded forms, they don't just shrink, they tend to curve in or out as they're drying. All right, so that was step 2. Step 3 is gonna involve a multi-weird finger method where I try to support as much of all sides as possible. So I'm just trying to lay this edge down, but if I lay it down too quick, it's gonna wanna sink. And when I go to lay it down, since it's still attached to this part, the whole thing's gonna wanna kind of move with it. So once again, a little bit of water. Let's take the sponge. There's another reason it's good to dry it out because we're using a fair amount of water with this step. So I'm gonna have one finger underneath, one finger on top, and the thumb, all kind of, if you can imagine, grabbing this edge and leaning it down. And then this, imagine this as our rim. So we're compressing the rim as we do it. So instead of compressing straight down, we're compressing at an angle so it comes in. All right, so that rim started to lay down. The lid you're gonna make is really gonna affect what you're doing here. If you make a nice thick lid, which you should try to get your lid to match the thickness of the body, anything will work. It'll sit on this edge, it'll be fine, but I'd like it to go down far enough that the thickness of this wall, the thickness of that lid would fit in there. So I'm gonna smooth out all sides, and just so it completely doesn't collapse, and hopefully everyone gets the idea, I'm gonna stop on this one. The final step is normally, and I'll do it slightly, something with a really great 90-degree angle. So that will lay right inside of this flange and push down. And if you've got enough clay there, you could actually move this thing up and down that wall as long as you support it from underneath. This right now is a ledge that's wet and it's fairly thin compared to some of the other parts, and it just wants to sink. So I'm gonna always have one finger underneath, one finger on the side, and I want this nice, sharp 90-degree angle. So now I'm gonna take my finger up and ease up. This is, once again, if you're not in the middle of a 90-minute demo, something you could let dry up a little bit and then do would be my recommendation. So I got it mainly where I want it. This is now where I would move it aside, come back later on when it's closer to like a soft leather hard and adjust these things because it'll hold up better. One thing we didn't do much of, which we can do now, is just spend some time compressing the floor. Once again, best tool ever. I'm gonna use mainly this edge, but a lot of times I'll come in and hold the tool like this and just use this flat bottom. I'll actually switch it. Usually the way the wheel's spinning, I'm going here and it's bending this way. Sometimes I'll swap to the other side and have it bend the opposite way, just picking a side that works for you. Mainly because I'm not great with my left hand. I'll use my right hand over here or flop it and use my right hand over here. I've got enough where I can use the entire base of this. Definitely think about drying off your hands and drying off the rib before you do this, just because it can cause problems. It is a thin piece of metal. If you've ever cut yourself with one of these, it's not fun. So if your hands are nice and dry, it's great. The further back you hold this tool, the better full contact you'll get. You won't get the little swirls and stuff inside of your pot. If you end up getting the swirls, push it down in one area you like it, slowly lift it up, move over, push it down again. It'll help keep it. I don't want any texture in the bottom of this. It's cool to put a big swirl in there, but once again, cleaning chili or something out of little grooves later on is not fun. So simple is better, in my opinion, for bakeware. I don't want to carve detail work in the outside. I don't want to make it thinner or thicker. I just want one nice, even, bigger pot. So once again, I've got pretty well on this side, but I'm going to flip it and bend the tool the opposite way so I can smooth out this edge as well. Sometimes just based on the way it's spinning and the size of the pot, I can get access to it better on the left side. So that's it for step number 1. That's our Flameware casserole. I'm gonna throw a lid, but I'm gonna throw the body of a frying pan first. Very rarely I'm gonna be cooking a roast in this thing and frying something in a pan at the same time. So what I do is I make the lids fit both. And that's a good trick for anything. If you're gonna sit down and throw a bunch of jars that you wanna put lids on, you can make the jars as different as you want, but if you make the openings the same, you just throw a bunch of lids and you can mix and match and see what fits later on. So, as of course, that was accidental. Basically, I took the lid off of one and I needed a little quick grease splatter thing and it fit perfectly on the other. You don't always have to have this perfect flange. I taught a workshop where you could choose between the two. You could do this step. You'd be surprised how many people said, yeah, let's try that afterward. Or you could just throw your piece to have this angled edge to it to where no matter what, the lid is gonna fit inside of that angle. If you can imagine like a larger tagine, a lot of times they have this edge. But you make the piece, and at the very top, you flare it out some. There's a really nice piece, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. I wish I had a board I could draw it up for you, but you basically throw a bowl with a really wide flange all the way out. You come in and you slice off 2 sides of that, and then you have the wide flange only on 2 edges. So what you're doing is you're making yourself a built-in handle. And then same deal, you don't need a flange, you don't need anything else, you just need the lid to fit inside of there. Does that make sense? No. No? All right, we go through one more time. Yeah. Imagine just a bowl shape, right? Similar to what we have here, but instead of coming up like this, it flares out all the way around. So the entire surface of the bowl has a big flare this way. So instead of leaving it all the way around, what you do is you could slice off that flare on 2 sides to where it only flares on one side and the other. So what you end up with, and I'll show you an image, this might be one of those, everyone come look at Shawn's little phone at the end of the workshop to see what I'm talking about. I know. That's not a bad idea. But anyway, it's just another way. If you're going to sit down and throw a lot of casseroles, do you want to do this, or do you want to come up with a way that makes it a little bit quicker? So we'll talk about that in a little bit, but there's ways to expedite the process. All right, so I'm going to pop this one off. It's going to be heavy. I don't know if you saw the amount of clay I started with, probably about 6 pounds. Most of the time I could have done that pretty easily with 3 if I were making like a bowl for just eating and drinking out of. So, drinking bowl. I usually cut it as soon as possible. This clay's a little different. It's a little on the damp side. I'm going to let it stiffen up just a little. Bigger, wider pieces and thinner like plates, I almost always cut immediately. The longer you wait for it to dry, the more the wire wants to slide up into the body of it. So what I'll usually do is I'll take a wooden stick tool and I'll make a little groove all the way down here at the very bottom edge. We're going to get rid of that anyways. And what that does is it gives a line for where the wire is going to start, just to give ourselves a little head start. I'll cut off this excess clay here, and then I'd slice underneath it. But once again, this is so wet, when I go to slice it, the thing's going to want to oval on me and cause some issues. You're definitely probably going to have to put this, put this back on the wheel at some point and make sure it's still nice and round, because even lifting it off the bat is going to possibly oblong the edge of it. So I use a little metal rib to slice underneath, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to go move it off to the side. I'm going to make, what's really funny is I might just do the frying pan or the lid, because they're the same thing. It's a plate shape. One of them's for the lid, one of them's for the body. But I'm going to set this off to the side. So basically, once just you guys know what's going on here, I threw this one the other day. This is the one I just threw now, very similar pots. I'm going to throw another one of these now for something for later, but I'm just going to throw a quick plate shape. This is very simple. I love making plates, and I despise everything else about them in terms of trimming, glazing, bigger buckets, slow. I'm not a guy who likes to baby things. I'd rather just keep rolling with it. So plates, like I said, they're very simple to make, but they're not always the easiest just to follow through with. So this is going to be the base of a frying pan or skillet. And once again, this is up to you to start with however much clay you want to start with. You want to make a little baby one, great. Still kick up the weight a little bit, because you want to leave these things beefy. So we're going to take, they're probably 3/8 of an inch. They'll trim down. So I keep talking about how heavy things are. The frying pan, you lift it up, you're going to notice there's some beef to it. The casserole's not super thick, but for the size of it, it's evenly weighted, which makes it feel nicer in my opinion, but it's still a little on the hefty side. So compared to anything else. I've got 1 or 2 over here that are quite a bit thinner, and they have some very small micro cracks in them. We'll talk about a little bit, if somebody reminds me, how Flameware cracks when it does, because sometimes you don't even know. It's not going to split in half and spill lasagna all over. You're just going to hear a ping. It's like, oh, it's got a crack. You could use it for a year longer. It's designed for that purpose. So we're going to do 3 pounds or so. Once again, just a quick wedge. If you've got clay down on your wheel from before and it's a little soft, it's fine. If it's starting to dry up, you might run into some issues. This one's a little firmer than I'd like, so I'm going to go ahead and just scrape it off.
The lids aren't directly in front of the flame. Do they really need to be as thick as the bottom part?
So for shrinkage purposes is why they need to be as thick. So yeah, the question was, do the lids need to be as thick as the bottom for flame-proof stuff? Not necessarily. You're not gonna, I do purposely make the lids where they can flip upside down and sit, so you can put spoons in them or serve them, you can do stuff with it, but they're not gonna be in contact as much with the direct flame. The reason they're the same thickness is if you made them thinner, they're gonna shrink differently, they're not gonna fit when all is said and done. See, I talked about how great this was. I don't think I even used it round 1, so we'll use it round 2. All right, so once again, I start from the top, and I really focus my pinkies down here at the very, very bottom. I'm gonna put some weight from above, because the clay's a little weird, and it's just one of those things I'm gonna keep saying it's a little weird, and eventually when you try it, you're gonna be like, oh, this clay's kind of weird. It's hard to describe why. It's a little grainy. It feels dry when it's not, and it kind of slips and slides. It doesn't want to adhere as well. But you gotta put up with those things for its amazing flame-proof properties. So.
What's the name of this flame?
This is called Diablo Flameware. We added the Diablo later because we thought it sounded like hot, flamey something. But it was originally just Flameware clay, and we're like, we could probably do better. Every other clay we make here has got some cool name like Big Sur or Santa Cruz. It's either someplace in California or something celestial. And the Diablo is the only one. Oh, technically like Diablo, wherever that is, Walnut Creeky area. I'm from Kentucky. I've been here 10 years. I still don't really know some of the places. Like Mount Diablo? Okay. When am I finished? All right, we got some time. I'll speed it up a little bit. So, here's how I like to do any sort of plate. You fix as you go. I'm gonna just compress the hell out of this thing. This is the only time you'll ever see my arm away from my body, is I'm gonna use the meaty part of my hand. If you've not tried this trick, it's great. So I've got the piece pretty centered, and instead of like slowly bringing it out a little bit at a time, once again, I'm gonna use the meaty part of my palm. I'm gonna chicken wing my right hand out, and I'm gonna use this part, and then I'm gonna bring my arm back into my body. And what that's gonna do is really push some clay and bring it back towards me. So I'm gonna make a pretty big indention. Now, no matter what, that's gonna dry up some, so I'll add a tiny bit of water. So a pretty big indention. My left hand is providing a little resistance, as it always should. And then I'm gonna slowly flatten some clay out. Now, I don't have a lot of sensitivity or touch in like the meaty part of my palm here. So what I need to do is then always come back in and smooth it out some. So my left hand, once again, goes to the edge to smooth it out. I'll grab one of my sponges, and I'll pull this to smooth it the rest of the way. So this is literally gonna be the same way I make a plate. It'll have very subtle differences. The main difference here is I gotta be able to put a handle on the side of this thing, and I have to be able to do that. The handle can't be so baby thin, at least the way I do them. So I need a little bit of height from my skillet. So what I'm gonna do is, there's my plate. You know, fairly thick, that's all right. We'll smooth, we'll trim. I'm gonna use the back side of this once again, and I'm really gonna compress this inside edge. We can compress more as we go, but that's just a little helpful step. And I'm gonna add a little bit of water to the edge. So this is the way I teach plates, this is the way I always make them. I'm gonna take one finger, flat to the side of this, I'm gonna slide it underneath between the bat and the clay. So basically I'm gonna slowly slide under, and I'm gonna stop when I get to a point. I'm gonna let it rotate a few more times. If you just do it and stop, you're not gonna get the right amount of space all the way around. Always easier to pull a piece vertical. If I try to write this now and pull this out sideways, it's gonna wanna flop on me. So what I'm gonna do is grab this piece and lift it vertical, and I'll lay it back down afterwards. So one thumb underneath, one finger on top, and I'll use my right hand as well. So there's our vertical little, once again, dog dish always comes to mind. If you're starting out with a dog dish, you're gonna be fine. So now I'm gonna just lift this vertical. Most people have a problem with plates, thicker at the bottom, everything else gets thin. We do want to get, once again, want to leave some weight to this. So this will be our smaller little 2-egg, 3-egg small frying pan. So I'm gonna lift this vertically from here. I am gonna let my left hand push out a little bit because I don't need it to completely go straight up. And the key here is it's just wasted clay down here in the very bottom edge. So I wanna try to lift that up, or else I'm just gonna cut it off. And that'll help give us the height we need for the rest of the pot. All right, so one more, very, very bottom edge. While it's still vertical, I must just be a cheapskate, because here's my other favorite tool. Piso plastic. I tend to lose these, but they're free. Chamois are a whole 75 cents, but I lose those too. This thin little piece of plastic, I just literally rip it off of any bag I see. I'm going to round it, and basically this is going to be my chamois, and you'll see how smoothly it rounds off this edge. Glossy, smooth, round. Perfect. Within a second. This will get left in your clay, because it'll get clay colored, and when they reclaim it at whatever studio you're at or your home, you're going to find this big chunk. The chamois gets left in your clay, it's going to decompose, because it's made out of skin, and it's going to turn to like black gelatinous ink that smells really bad in your reclaim bin. So keep an eye on regardless of whatever sort of chamois you're using. So I'm going to dampen the inside one more time, and I'm going to use my pointer finger right on this edge, and I'm just going to lean it back. No pulling, no pushing. Literally, I'm just going to pivot. Now that I've got access to the entire inside, I'll smooth out that extra water, and I'll compress the floor. That's it. So, once again, hopefully you can see how this could also be the way we make our lid. The only difference here is, I'll grab calipers if anyone wants to see it, but basically we're going to measure, if we're doing the lid, our flange, where we have that L shape inside of our larger casserole. We're going to measure this edge to this edge with our calipers. And then we're going to make our bowl fit just right. I actually prefer to make it, as crazy as it sounds, a tiny bit too big, like a micro bit too big. Because later on you can always come in and just shave a tiny bit down where it's hard to like widen it out once it's firm or leather hard. So this is going to be our frying pan, but it could very easily flip upside down and be the lid. Does everyone make sense? All right, so I'm going to pop this off. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a couple of these pieces that are now a little leather hard from the other day. I'm going to show you all how to join them, and I'm going to do it right here at the wheel. Because why not? Who needs a bunch of space in a table when you've got a spinning wheel head? So I'm going to drop this off. So I'm going to start by trimming my lid that I made on Thursday. So, all right. This would be a great time at home. Dry your hands, grab a beer, take a break, whatever you got to do, and come get into trim mode since you've been in throw mode this whole time. So, all right. So I'm basically just centering this piece, getting it as close as I can, little bit at a time. Doesn't look very centered, but that's pretty close. So, a couple chunks of clay to hold the piece down. This isn't anything different than anyone's ever done if they've thrown a piece on the wheel and had to trim it. I'm going to keep these fairly low and shallow. I do like them to be even. I'll make 3 pieces all about the same size. Some people just kind of grab whatever they got and stick it on there. This will help everything hold on evenly. So very bottom edge, I'm always holding onto the pot, and I've just got little lug that holds in place. Same deal, another little piece, holding on to the pot. Standard Shawn Felts workshop. Very, very slow, and then super speed. So just be ready for all the things we're going to fit in the next 20 minutes. All right, so give it a little wobble. Everything fits. That's great. Here's the problem. I have to grab a trimming tool very quickly. So everyone just take a 5-second breather. I'm going to grab myself a little rag too, because somehow I remembered everything but that. So I'll be back in 2 seconds. I chugged a beer when I was in there too. You guys missed it. So trimming tools are important. I find these around. We're a ceramic supply shop. I just grab whatever we've got that we use. They're awful. Standard Kemper, whatever else. Sorry, this is going to go out there. Hi, everyone at Kemper. If you're going to sit down and you're going to trim, you're doing this and that, these are $4 or $5 a piece. These are 11. They are made out of carbon steel. So Groovy tools, Dolan tools, some others, they're definitely, in my opinion, worth it. This thing I did not know. Like I said, I usually work Fridays. I was off yesterday. I went and saw Hamilton, by the way. It was great. I forgot, and I booked it for noon on a Friday when I booked my tickets, not paying attention. So moral of that story is usually I'd be around for one more day, watch my pieces, make sure they're perfect. We did a bowl-a-thon here once. We threw 1,500 bowls for a charity some years back, and 3 of us trimmed them all. And these Dolan tools were the ones that work the best. Like I said, they're carbon steel. They stay sharp forever. They are more prone to rusting because they're not stainless. Moral of the story is get yourself a nice trimming tool. This will rip through just about anything until it's literally almost bone dry. So I'm gonna start on the edge, and I don't need to trim much. When I threw this, I purposely cut off a little. My goal here is just to literally, if you could slice this in half, which maybe we will, try to get as even thickness all the way around. So I'm gonna start on this edge, and I'm gonna go fairly decent speed and trim fairly quickly, but I'll keep an eye on these little lugs of clay because I don't want this pot to go flying. If you find you're running into issues ever trimming, most people do it all the way up here at like a 45-degree angle at 3 o'clock or so. If you bring it back down here in between like 3 and 6, it tends to carve a little bit better, and some tools are actually designed for that angle. So I actually bring it a lot of times closer to me, you get more control over it, and I'm really holding onto the tool, I'm really sitting close. Once again, this isn't one of those like, take a little clay off. And you'll see my wheel is going fairly rapidly, and for a reason. I keep my foot on the pedal almost at all times, even though I tend to teach people to get to a good speed and take it off. I keep it on because I go fast, and sometimes it goes too fast, or sometimes bad things happen. It's good to be able to slow it down and stop. So we're gonna try quiet to see if anyone can hear here real quick. So thicker part versus thinner part. Thicker part's gonna be a deep thud. Thin should be more like a bongo, it'll reverberate. So okay. So I'm trying to match. So it's still fairly thick here in the middle. This is quite a bit thicker. So I'm just gonna take off from here out. I'm actually not gonna get to the middle at all if I don't have to. The only time I'll go to the middle to trim is if when I sliced it off, I didn't slice it very well and there was like a little lip or an edge to it. Lynn and I, side by side, the two loudest people on the planet. Maybe that's why they always stick me back in this corner. It's probably smart of them. Yeah, just stick me outside. First time I did this, I thought this was a microphone. I was like, oh no, I'm not gonna need that. All right, so one lap. Trimming is trimming, but the big thing here is, once again, I'm just trying to round off and smooth out edges and try to get to an even thickness, which means mainly, no matter who's throwing, that bottom edge where you threw your piece is always where it's gonna be the thickest. We wanna really get rid of that extra clay down in the body. All right, so, pretty good. If I was working on this at home, I might spend a little more time. Has anyone ever thrown a knob for a handle directly onto their piece? All right. This is how I do almost all of these. Once again, I don't like to roll it out, wait, sit at the table, do them both. I'm gonna do them side by side. So there's always a risk. This is where it's the thinnest. I'm gonna have to put a little weight in the middle of this to get this little piece to stick. Another big thing about knobs with any sort of cookware, they need to be big. Imagine reaching in, you're not gonna bare hand it. You're gonna reach into the oven or whatever with like a giant pair of oven mitt or a rag. You need to be able to grab a hold of it. So you'll always see mine have some sort of kind of mushroom shape where you can reach over the knob and grab a hold of it. So I'm gonna take a couple ounces of clay, and the more even I get this, the better. That'll be easier for me to actually trim. And I'm gonna give myself a little guideline with a needle tool. And I'm gonna go ahead and just use the needle tool to also kind of score up the surface here. I'm gonna add a little water, and if I got some slip from throwing earlier, that's even better. You don't need a lot. Too much slip, actually, in my opinion, causes problems. The thing will slide a little bit more, you'll have more of the goop you gotta clean up. You just need enough to give yourself a place for this all to stick to. Same thing, as weird as this sounds, even though it's wet clay, I'm gonna scratch up the side of the bottom. And when people do this, if you do just like a tiny tic-tac-toe board, that's not enough, in my opinion. You really wanna picture in your head like Velcro. Like these two pieces are really prying together. When I push them out, they're gonna fill in the gap on each other. So this is too much, I know it, so I'm gonna do a little less. And I'm gonna really be ginger, because once again, you all heard the difference in the sound here. Wouldn't be the first time I pushed through a pot during a demo, it will not be the last, but let's all hope and pray that doesn't happen right now. So you can actually make these, they're a little more Hershey Kiss shaped out, which I should have done, so I can start spreading the clay to make it stick. So what I'm actually gonna do is use the back, the little wooden stick tool, and I'm gonna grab some clay and push it down. Grab some clay, push it down. This is anything you can do to get it to stick a little bit easier without having to put all your weight into the standard style of slipping and scoring. All right, so hopefully that's a good start. Now this is another thing, only a little bit of water at a time. I don't want a bunch of water dripping down, gluing these wads onto whatever else I've done. So a little bit of water, but I clean up as I go. And basically, I'm gonna try to just work from the outside, lightly smoothing, making sure it's stuck well before I do anything else. And I'm really keeping an eye on the pot. So nice top. I mean, that could be it, but that's quite a bit thicker than the rest of it. So I always want to hollow it out. It's almost like just throwing a little cylinder. So that went down towards the bottom where I wanted it to go. Once again, a little bit of water, and I'm just going to lift up and pull. Now the good thing about this is you're putting so much time into scoring it, slipping it, pushing down, pushing up. It'll adhere really well. The bad thing, just like any other time, is this is quite a bit more dry than this is, just like adding a handle to a coffee mug. So what I'll do usually is give it a couple spritz with water and wrap it in plastic for at least a day, and then I will let it out in its natural habitat. So once again, all I'm doing is pulling up. It's like a little, I use the word shot glass a lot, but I mean, that's what this looks like to me. And what I'll do now is this is where I'll open it up. I'll put one finger on the outside, one finger on the inside, and push it over, and that'll lay that edge out. And if you've ever taken a class or workshop with me, you know I just can't leave well enough alone and leave it smooth and even. So I tend to come in and put a little flare of some kind into it. It'll still flip upside down and sit fine because all three edges do the same. And then I'll usually come in and try to smooth off any kind of mess I just made. Now that it's attached, I will let this stiffen up some. I'll come in if I need to add a little clay or smooth it out afterward. I won't do it there. I'll put it back on the wheel and do it. But that's just how I attach a knob to the rest of this body. And you can see it's something pretty sizable you can grab a hold of. It's it.
At this point, I always have a problem where it seems like the weight of the handle over time pushes the lid in.
Yeah. Yes. So even this, I'll be honest with everyone, it's not too thin, but it was recently thrown, just trimmed. Mine's thinner in the middle also. So you could have, another way to do this, take a coil, take a couple coils and wrap it around, smooth out. Anything you do to not put a lot of pressure downward on it. I have actually taken this exact same approach. I've trimmed it, then I've lifted up and put 2 or 3 sponges, the bigger ones underneath, then put it down, anything to give yourself a little bit of pressure still up. It's a crapshoot if it's gonna work or not. I love doing everything at the wheel. This is something, if it was a little thin, probably be better to throw a knob, let it both stiffen up, score it, attach it, move my hand on the underside. I do everything at the wheel literally to a fault, whether it's the right way to do it or not. So there's our lid.
So you don't put anything on to support it?
This time, at this point, I don't think it's going to move down much more than anything else, so I think it should be all right. And what I would normally do is, as I'm carefully walking over there, I might, from underneath, just push it up a little bit now, just to give it a little bit of a oomph. So I'm going to take this guy off. I've got 15 minutes, and I think we're going to have enough time to show you a few things. I think, even though everyone's going to be leaving or doing whatever to eat lunch, I think I'll wait till we're finished, and I'll throw this stuff in here, and then whoever wants to see it cooking in this net, it'll flame up and start going immediately, but it'll take some time before our broccoli's done. So, yeah, so I've used sponges or newspaper, something underneath, something that'll give a little bit, but something that will keep it kind of going from there. So, you can almost see if you came close enough, it's got a little indent. I'll let it stiffen up some, and then what I would do is come from underneath and just lightly push it back up, or maybe even just take a rib and smooth it out. All right, so we've got the handle.
How do you not warp it when you do that?
Really, I'm only trying to focus on that tiny little area. So letting it stiffen up. So it's a fine line of too firm versus too soft. So you want to get to like that almost leather hard where you can pick it up without it moving, but too hard, you're not going to be able to push that up much. So I'm not going to trim the bottom of this one, guys, just because you've seen it once, you've seen it 100 times. When these stiffen up a little bit, I'll put this on here to show you all hopefully how this fits. I do want to spend just a couple minutes showing you all how to attach a throne handle. It's not something I planned on demoing in terms of the handle. All I did was throw a cylinder and collar it in quite a bit. So it's a narrow, thin cylinder. It's always going to be quite a bit thicker on one side and thinner on the other. The thick side tends to be where my hand goes. For a smaller frying pan like this, that's probably okay. The longer you can make these, the better. So I do have one that's a decent amount longer. So I'm going to come back over to the wheel, and I'll show you all how we do the next step here. Literally just a cylinder. Like I said, I could do a demo. It wouldn't be anything worth recording or watching. All I do, although I will warn you, at least for me, it's a little difficult. You're throwing something tall and narrow. You have to throw it a little thicker, collar it in. You got to get your finger or a tool in there and collar it, because it's going to be thick, and you collar it and it's going to be thin. All right. So if you've got a studio, there's a nice table. This would be the one. I would move over into hand building land to do this. It's just going to make it much easier for you. So I threw these once again on Thursday. They stiffened up quicker than the rest of the pieces for some reason. So they're a little on the firm side, but they're not terrible. This was thrown vertical. I just tried to get as tall as I could, and I wanted to get it as narrow as I can at one point, because it's actually going to attach to the piece this way. This is a little jankety at the moment. It's something I would come in, smooth, clean up. You could actually attach it to the wheel vertical and trim it to get rid of some of the excess. All I'm going to do is use a needle tool. If you had a fettling knife, you could also. No matter how well I think I throw it, like anything else, it's going to be thicker at the bottom. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to just carve about half of this out. So for this demo, it's not going to be the world's prettiest handle attached, but it should get the job done for what we want to do. I just don't want it way thick on one side and thin on the other, because it's just going to cause problems and weigh the rest of it down. So we're just going to smooth out the edge. This is going to be the back handle side. So this is something I would spend my time getting it as pretty as possible. This is the part you're going to see, that part you're going to hold. I'm not going to necessarily do that. So sometimes even these little rounder trimming tools are great, because they got that thinner edge to come in and just try to grind off a little bit of that extra clay. All right, let's pretend, really use your imagination, that that's beautiful on the outside. What has to happen now is this part has to be attached to this. Now, if I attach it the way it wants me to, it's not really going to work out. So I need to cut this at almost a 45-degree angle this way, so the thing will lift up some. You don't even want it straight out. Imagine trying to grab this with your hand close to the flame. If you have it a little bit, the reason I have this is where my hand goes. It gives myself a reminder. And this will stay very cool to the touch because it's hollow. Air is the best insulator there is. You could roll out a handle. You could pull one. You could do a lot of things, but this I find has the best. I could take that frying pan and do this with it, and it's not going to go anywhere. With a big beefy base, you need a little bit more of a handle. So I'm going to just start at one side and the other and give myself a guideline, and I'm going to carve up and take away a little bit of this clay. Just happens. Oh yeah, that's way better. So once again, you'll hear me keep saying clay's kind of weird. It needs a nice sharp knife. It wants to crumble. Now this is a little on the dry side once again, but it needs something fairly sharp to slice through it, even when it's a little bit leather hard, just because it's kind of grainy. And when you cut it, kind of odd things tend to happen. So let's just pretend we're getting close. But this bottom has to clear the floor. So this can't touch also. So if you look, pretty darn close. I might slice just a little bit more off, because as of right now, no matter what, this bottom section where my pinky's touching is going to get a little low. So we'll do one more slice. We'll get rid of a little bit of this edge here. And I do really look at it and try to make sure it's even, because if you slice a little bit more on one side or the angles are off, the thing is going to sit a little jankety. Which is my favorite word of all time. So I have an idea of where that's going to go. right on the side of the pot. Doesn't really matter unless you have a defect, just like doing mugs or anything else. You find where it's not the prettiest and you hide that area with a handle. So that goes there. Circle meets the spot. So double little concentric circles, score, score, score all the way around, score this, that's where they'll meet. It's not the easiest thing to join. So these are a little bit problematic. If you get the dryness level just right, it's okay. It's not like the worst thing ever. If it starts to stiffen up a tiny bit or if it's a little bit too damp, it just tends to want to, no matter how much work you do, if you kind of take your hand off the thing, it wants to just pull away. So what I tend to do is flip the whole thing upside down, and then I give myself some space. I'll pop off the splash pan, and what I'll do is I'll come in from the back edge so I have something to kind of lay this down onto. It's great to just literally have a bat to where you can have it hanging off the edge, and then you have all of this space to really spend time making sure it's really well stuck onto it. So, you know what we'll do, just because we got it, we'll give ourselves some height. Flameware is versatile for all things. Or isn't. Keep you around for a reason. This would be a great time to turn your wheel off so you don't splatter everyone in the audience. So I'm gonna do my best. Once again, it's like a TV cooking show. Nobody pours things into their batter like this way, but so you all can see, I'm gonna try to do it on the side here. So I really scored up the side. I'm gonna really score up this as well. I don't know if you noticed, I'm gonna occasionally dunk it in water, or I did it a couple times already, because like I said, it's a little dry. Not too dry that it won't work, but it's fairly dry. Okay, so just like anything else, I'm gonna bring it back towards me just for a moment, if you don't mind, guys. And I'm gonna just spend some time pushing it on. See, it's good no one could see that. I got it wet. I ducked my hand in the bucket and I really swirled around because this is a little on the dry side. It kind of made a slippy feeling almost right off the bat. It's gonna get a little shorter than it was, sorry to say. I think this dried up a little more than I would have liked, so we're going to do a little bit of the what would I do had it been the right dryness level. All right, so lightly push it up against the side. And then I'm going to use a wooden tool just like I did earlier, and I'm going to take the clay from the actual handle, I'm going to slowly push it into the rest of the body. This might not stay on at all, guys, I'll warn you. Girls, guys, ladies, gentlemen. With the amount of force I'm going to need to push it on there, it may not stay. But I think by the time we're done, at least everyone will get the gist of the key is kind of the angle of how you want to do this. So I'm upside down, which means it needs to be leaning down, not leaning up. I do, and actually, believe it or not, this little ring is enough, but if you can make it to where this is a solid piece of clay instead of just a ring attaching it, the entire thing is solid. Even if I took a piece of clay right now, attached it to here, got it all to stick, and then I could score up the entire surface, it gives you a little bit more strength, and you're not losing any of that airflow because it's flat. So if you can imagine this pushed onto here, nice and dry, then that whole thing goes on, it's just gonna give you more clay to join onto the piece. So I'm gonna give it one more little dip. I have a feeling old Shawn's not going to get this one on here, just to warn you, but. So it's either going to crack the handle or crack the pot. I have faith in myself to a degree. This is where you really need a third hand. So I'm holding it from underneath, holding it from above. I apologize, you all can't see what I'm doing at the moment. The goal was to get it enough to where I could show it to you, but I don't think that's going to happen. It's not pretty, even when everything goes well, it's not very pretty. When I first join things, I don't care what it looks like. I really want it to stick. I'll keep it vertical, I'll come in, I'll let the weight of the piece itself do all the work for me. So the verticality of this is really the only thing kind of saving. And this is not quite the angle I wanted, but as long as it comes off to where this isn't going to bump into anything, it should be all right. If it were a bit softer, you can kind of get on there and you can tweak it just a little bit at a time. So just so everyone sees, as soon as I touch it, the whole thing's wanting to come off. So we're not going to get to this one, sorry to say. I do want to, we got maybe 5 minutes, I'm not even sure. I do want to show something real quick because I make a lot of stuff. Like I said, my interest will go from like, oh, Flameware's dumb, I'm only into pit fire for this year. Then I'll get out of pit fire and, oh, I'm just going to wood fire everything. Or now I'm into bottles, now I'm into jars. I'm going to grab a little clay and just same thing while we're sitting right here. I'm going to show you a quick trick because I do like my handle style on these style of pieces. So I'm going to grab the lid over. It's going to be a quick 2-minute demo, but the key is just going to be how I angle them so they attach to the piece. So I'm going to be back in just a second. I like this little surface lifted up, and the good thing here is this is something I would do at the wheel once again because I don't need a ton of space. I'm going to roll little coils this long. I think rolling coils still to this day is one of the hardest things to do in ceramics and how to do it even, and there's a couple of tricks I've learned over the years. I don't know if they were fake when people showed them to me. I've taught them to lots of people and I hope they work, but I've had some people agree with me that's a good trick. So I am purposely wetting some of my bat, some of the board, some of the table, whatever you all are going to be rolling your coil on. And what I'm going to do is roll from dry to wet, back and forth. No matter what, even if your clay is in a perfect shape, rolling it out, touching with your hands, rolling it on plaster or wood or whatever that may be, it's going to dry it out some. We want this thing to be bendy, it's a real word, bendy, after we roll it out. So by rolling it from dry into wet, we're going to keep a little bit of moisture. Now, too much water, the whole thing's going to go crazy. It's going to start sliding. I know this is going to be more clay than I need, so I'm just trying to roll 2 3-inch little nubs, and I want to make them identical. So what you can do is roll one big coil, you could roll a few. I'm going to do it fairly quickly, and I do like to start in my hands. I know I can roll it pretty close in my hands, and then I'll go to the board here. So once again, there's a little bit of wetness here, and if you find yourself starting to square out a little bit, it'll happen when you hear the thud, thud, thud. This is the trick. I tell you it works, whether it's mental or not. You roll, twist in one direction one clay, one direction the other. Has everyone ever seen that? No? All right. So some people saying yes, some people don't know. Whether it really works or just your mind thinks it works, like immediately it seems smoother to me as soon as I start rolling it out. So like literally a second it was thud, thud, thud. You do that twist. It's something about keeping it round. I don't know. So I got taught this many years ago. I've taught it to a lot of people, and whether it works or not, I'm going to keep doing it because in my mind it works. So I'm going from all the way to the very bottom of my hand, all the way to the tips of my fingers. So it's not just a little bit, all the way up, all the way back. And this is going to be enough for me to make both of those coils, and you don't want to go too thin. Once again, we got some beefy things we're going to lift up. It's beefy already. Imagine a 5-pound roast or a bunch of soup or something. You really want to be able to grab it. So I'm going to take this piece, and I'm going to come in with my needle tool, and I'm going to slice it in half. Then I'm going to lay it side by side, little thin on that side. So you can actually reverse roll, if anyone's ever done that, just to re-thicken it a little bit. All right, so I'm going to lay them side by side, and then I'm going to cut both of them, to be exact. There's one, there's the other. So here's the trick for me. Do it so everyone can see. Can everyone behind me this way see? So basically I'm going to take this, I'm going to flip it up, I'm going to take this other side, and I'm going to flip it up. Whoop. Try that one more time. Let's flip it down. So the idea is I'm trying to bend it underneath. So I'm going to take it, and I'm going to really get a bend and bend it underneath. I'm going to take the other side, I'm going to try to really get it to bend, and I'm going to bend it underneath. So basically when I join these parts to the clay, I'm going to grab this piece so I can show you all as a demonstration here. When I join it to the clay, it's joining in on a flat surface, but when you're lifting the weight, you're lifting from another part. A lot of people would just join it like this. That's it. But when you go to lift, you're literally trying to pull it off. The idea behind this is you're not trying to pull it off, it's a different angle. So you're lifting upward, you'd have to pull it downward to try to actually break this handle off to pieces. That makes sense to everyone? It took me a while to kind of figure out this style, and I started liking it the most because I just like it aesthetically, but function is much more important to me than aesthetics. So step one, it has to be functional, then I tweak it to make it pretty. So I'm gonna grab this little guy real quick. And same deal here, I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna bend it down, I'm gonna bend it down. So I don't know if anyone can see nice, soft, fresh clay starting to crackle a little bit on the edges. This is Flameware. This is something you just have to be able to deal with. Gotta come in and smooth it out, you have to take your time. But the idea here would be, I would come in with the flat edge, trim up an area here. I'm sorry, trim up, score up an area here as well. I'd find an area on this side and an area on this side, and I would do the same. Really score it up. Really score it up. So basically you can see I've got this little scored area on the outside of the pot. I would get it wet and I would attach it. And once you attach these, they're much easier. So we'll push it in after we just give it a little dunk in water. And as strong as Flameware is, it's a little bit more brittle at the leather hard state I've found than other clays. So if I went to push real hard, I could crack this rim. I think a little bit easier than some other clay bodies. You gotta have to put up with some things for the Flameware to do what we want it to do. So I'm gonna spend some time just pushing those in, and then once they're in, I could come in and smooth out this edge and try to get it to kind of whatever shape I want. I'll get a little bit of water, I'll smooth out any of those little cracks. I would try to do one, I always do one first, then I rotate, I'll do a couple little lines here. It's very odd to put one on one side here and the other one weirdly ends up over here. So make sure they're right across from each other.
So you start with this shape and then shape it to that? Or you don't like it flat out first?
I do. So this one was actually fairly rounded as well. It's when you push it in, it thins out some, and then what I'll do is I'll take a wet finger and I'll come in and smooth it out to give myself a little bit more space. Every pot's gonna be different. You've got a tiny little pot, a couple lugs are fine. You've got a big one, you might need to roll out a coil this big and quite a bit beefier. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll roll a coil, get it to the shape I want, and then I'll take a rolling pin, a small one, and I'll flatten it out slightly. Just because what it'll do is it'll give you more room between this part of the clay and the handle you just added. Right now it's kind of a coil where sometimes a little squished in is fine. You don't need much. You want it beefy and you want it attached, but you don't need like something to get 3 fingers or anything. You just need something to be able to grab onto and lift. A lot of people literally just do that idea where they just attach this and then they'll leave a couple of grooves underneath so your fingers can grab a hold of. Some people even flatten it out and do the same. So just something to get a hold of, but it needs to be extremely strong to be attached to the Flameware clay body. So I know, sorry guys, a little haphazard at the end there with trying to get everything in. Are there any specific questions? Because there's a few things I would like to touch on in terms of the body and firing, but does anyone have any questions in particular about anything? All right, so a couple of notes. Besides Flameware clay's a little weird, it fires fine up to cone 9, 9.5. It's designed for 10. So you should fire to 10. If you're just gonna make simple shapes, these little handles wouldn't need anything else done to them. The longer handles that come off, if you've got any like teapot spouts, anything that's kind of holding out on its own in the air unsupported, this clay is very pyroplastic, meaning when it gets up to close to the temperature where it's supposed to be fired to, let's say you're firing to 2350, at around 2300, it can get a little saggy. So some things need to be posted. So I've actually did a workshop at Higher Fire. We had most of the things were fine and we knew. So any little spouts, like I said, teapots were the big one. We did a workshop with teapots for Flameware and all the spouts came out. We would take a post, just the same thing you would post up your kiln shelves with, and we'd put a little clay or something. You want it to be able to shrink and move, but you don't want it to be just sitting completely in the air to where it falls flat. These handles are the same. So these handles, because they go up vertical, I put a little post underneath of it. At bisque, it's okay, but when you get to high temperature, if you just left it out like this, more than likely this handle would have completely sunk down flat. It's just a softer clay body at high temperatures. It's designed to be completely watertight. And to do that, you add more fluxes and more things into it. So we could take some of those things out and it wouldn't be so watertight and this would be easier, but then it would lose some of its Flameware properties. So it's a fine line of making it a workable, easy to use clay, but also making it flame proof. So any spouts, any handles, if you had a big teapot handle on the top, it might get a little fluid. Does anyone here ever do wood firing, soda firing, salt firing, anything atmospheric? Okay, wadding does not work on this. So for those who are familiar, when you wood fire, salt fire, soda fire, anything that has something introduced into the atmosphere, if I just set this on the kiln shelf like normal, the salt, the soda, the wood, the ash, the heat would glue it to the kiln shelf. So it needs something underneath it, little balls of clay we call wads. It's like if you imagine kiln wash, you only added a tiny bit of water and mixed it into a clay material. If I put 3 wads underneath just like I normally would, it would hold it up, but it would come out, you'd probably have 3 little dents inside of your clay. That's how soft this gets. So Alumina Wax, if anyone's never used that, the same wax you would use to put on the bottom of your piece to prevent glaze, you can buy Alumina Wax, or you can buy a whole pound of alumina for $2.50 and just mix a tablespoon or 2 into your wax. What that does is you wax the bottom of the piece. The wax burns away at a couple hundred degrees, but the alumina has nowhere to go. So it literally, picture kiln wash, sits in between your piece and the shelf. Silicon carbide shelves. I don't know if anyone's had the issues with if you use porcelain at studios, you fire them, they can stick. Same thing here. Just picture this getting closer to glass than other clays do at that temperature. It's going to be kind of that molten, and it can get a little soft or fluid. So you have to put some precautions in to make sure it survives. There's nothing worse than spending all this time and energy and then it's stuck to a kiln shelf. It'll pop free, but you have little divots. Or if you were to wood or soda fire, you could run into those same issues. I have a feeling we're close on time, but I did want to get a couple of questions in and then I can answer anything else. So, sorry, we have one right here first and then we'll work our way over.
This temperature and firing schedule to come.
Yes, so BIS temperature, cone 04. I recommend it for anything you're firing. Doesn't matter if you're doing low fire, mid fire, or high fire. Nice and slow. Don't go into the fast just because you got to rush. In my opinion, no matter what clay you're firing, cone 04 is better. You're going to burn out more of the impurities in the clay. You're going to shrink it a tiny bit more than you would at 05, 06, 07. And it's going to give more room for your glaze to shrink onto it without running into issues. And this is all clays. For cone 10, there really, in my opinion, is no firing schedule. I have found over the years, a fast glaze fire to cone 10, if you have an electric kiln, will produce your best result on most glazes. If you're going to use the iron glaze, which is one of the ones we make here for this clay body, iron glaze is the one exception. Glazes that contain a high amount of iron, if you slow fire them and slow cool them, meaning you just let the kiln cool naturally without pulling out peeps or opening the lid, you'll get more crystals, you'll get more color, you'll get it brighter. But in general, slow BIS to cone 04, I won't even do a ramp and hold. I'll just let Scud or Conard or Crest, whatever kiln you got. If you do a fast glaze firing to cone 10 or a medium, that's a built-in program they've designed. Should work out fine. So key is, once again, just remember to post up anything you think might sag. That was the same question, okay?
We were talking about teapot handles
Yep.
sagging. What would you do about stilting?
A little bit more difficult with teapot handles. So I have had people fire. If they're even, and they're like the taller round handles, they actually tend to be okay. If they've got a little bit lean one way or the other. Exactly. The arc is the strongest shape there is, that rounded oval shape, so the arc should help out. It's more like teapot handles when people do this style off the side of the pot. Anything that's kind of hanging out freely on its own, just remember you got to do some support. You'll take it out of the kiln, it'll be an upside down teapot. So, yeah.
What if you don't put any glaze? Can you just go straight on the cone?
So, technically, yes, I do recommend, if at all possible, I always think it's easier and safer to do a bisque fire than do your cone 5 or cone 10. Mainly because there's a lot of stages the first time this clay gets fired. Even if you're only firing to 04, which is like 1940 degrees, you're burning out a lot of impurities. You're going through what's called quartz inversion, where the silica in the clay expands when you go up through it and you go down through it. I have done firings for people where you go straight to cone 5 or straight to cone 10. It tends to be almost the amount of time of doing them both, because you go super, super slowly to one point. You can speed up a little bit. I've found more issues doing that than just do a bisque when it comes out, do a cone 10. I have one or two more quick points to make. Flameware clay does not mix well with others. So if you're ever going to buy this and use it in your own studio or a public studio, don't reclaim your slop. Don't throw it in with everyone else's. Problematic being, someone gets a bag of changeover clay or leftover clay that they remake and it's got a large amount of flameware, the glazes aren't going to fit it quite as well. They're going to run into some of the bad sides of the flameware instead of the good. So when I sit down and throw flameware, it's all I do when I'm done. Everything gets cleaned really well. I'll keep it for myself, the scraps for recycling, making my own, but they don't get added into like the large batch of everything else. Everybody good? That's it? Everyone got the majority of the questions? So, yeah.
I read an article about you have to be so careful with Flameware because it might blow up. Is that something?
So, I've never seen it happen. There's a reason, in my opinion, a lot of studios and a lot of clay shops like ours don't make it, is that they're afraid of the liability. Somebody goes home, and the problem is it's not the Flameware, it's the person making it. If they don't follow the rules, they leave, it's really thin one side, thick on the other, it's got a foot ring, they do all the things they weren't supposed to do. You take that teapot and put it on your stove and you boil water in it, it really still shouldn't explode. That's everyone's fear, is the grenade of boiling hot water, or the grenade of lasagna, whatever it is. I have had pieces break on me. I was doing a workshop, firing up stuff, and I heard a ping. And I'm like, what was that? It wasn't until like 3 days later I saw this hairline crack in the bottom. Liquid, it was like a soup. Liquid didn't even spill out of it. They are designed, I hate to say designed to crack, but if they do crack, they're designed to be able to handle that. And a lot of people tell you, you won't even know. This far piece on the very far left, the smaller one, this is a Seattle Pottery Supply Flamer, the smallest little nabe kind of piece of there. It's got micro cracks in the bottom, you can see them. I could fill it with water right now to be fine. I think the reason it has micro cracks is I glazed it with just a heavy iron glaze, not necessarily designed for Flameware. The expansion of the clay and glaze were different, and it probably had these fine cracks even just coming out of the cone 10. Flames will find that. So I don't think you're really going to run into the issues. I would say follow the rules. If anyone's interested, anyone who put their name, I have 3 things I'm going to send out. The big doc we have, something called the 11 rules to treating your Flameware, and then one called the Flameware guideline. Talks about thickness, how to wad them, alumina wax, what to do, what glazes to use, how to burnish, all the big things that'll give you your best success for Flameware. So at some point, I definitely recommend grabbing a bag, trying it out. You'll see a lot of the things you're like, why does he keep saying it's weird? What's going on with this? You'll just find it's a little different than other clay bodies. It's like if you were just going to use porcelain the first time. You're like, this stuff's great, also a little bit terrible all at the same time. So that's pretty much it, guys. I apologize for the not being able to get that handle on, but you know, you win some, you lose some. So cool, of course. Yeah, you got it.